Hello and welcome. My name is Alan and we are back with more Eats, Shoots, and Leaves. So, yeah, it's been a while since I've done any reading where I was off for about a week there. But we're going to get right back into this. So, here we go. The question mark, with its elegant seahorse profile, takes up at least double the space on the page of an exclamation mark, yet gets on people's nerves considerably less. What would we do without it? Like the exclamation mark, it is a development of the full stop, a terminator only used at the ends of sentences, starting out as the punctus interrogatorus in the second half of the 8th century. Then it resembled a lightning flash striking from right to left. The same question mark, which is rather a dull one, quite frankly, was acquired in the second half of the 19th century and has never caught on universally. Journalists dictating copy will call it a query, and while we are on the subject of dictation, in this passage from P.G. Wodehouse's Over 70, 1957, it is delightfully called something else. How anybody can compose a story or word of mouth face to face without a bored-looking secretary with a notebook is more than I can imagine. Yet many authors think nothing of saying, "Ready, Miss Spelvin? Take dictation." Quote, no comma. Sir Jasper Murgatroyd, comma, close quotes, comma, said no better make it hist, Evangeline, comma, quote, I would not marry you if you were the last man on earth, period, close quotes. Quote, well, comma, I'm not, comma, at the point, so the point does not arise, comma, close quotes, replied Sir Jasper, twirling his mustache cynically, period. And so the long day wore on, period. End of chapter. If I had to do that sort of thing, I should be feeling all the time that the girl was saying to herself as she took it down, well, comma, this beats me, period. How, comma, with Holmes for the feeble-minded, touting for custom on every side, comma, has a man like this succeeded in remaining at large, mark of interrogation. Question marks are used when the question is direct. What is the capital of Belgium? Have you been there? Did you find the people very strange? When the question is inside quotation marks, again, it is required. Did you try the moles and chips? He asked. But when the question is indirect, the sentence manages without it. What was the point of all this sudden interest in Brussels, he wondered. I asked if she had something in particular against the Belgian national character. Increasingly, people are ignorantly adding question marks to sentences containing indirect questions, which is a bit depressing, but the reason is not hard to find. Blame the famous upward inflection taught by all teenage viewers of Neighbors in the past 20 years. Previously, the people said, "You know?" and "Know what I'm saying?" at the end of every sentence. Now they don't bother with the words and just use the question marks to save time. Everything ends up becoming a question by talking about statements. It's getting quite annoying, but at least it keeps the question mark alive, so it can't be all bad. Deciding which way round to print the question mark wasn't as straightforward as you might think, incidentally. In the traditional orientation with the curve to the right, it appears to cup an ear toward the preceding noise. It seems natural enough, though perhaps only because that's how we are used to seeing it. But people have always played around with it. In the 16th century, the printer Henry Denham had the sophisticated idea of reversing the mark when indicating a rhetorical question to differentiate it from a direct question. But it didn't catch on. So you can imagine other printers muttering uncertainly, "Rhetorical question? What's a rhetorical question? Is this a rhetorical question?" and not being able to answer. The Spanish Academy, however, in 1754 ratified the rather marvelous and flamboyant idea of complementing terminal question marks and exclamation marks with upside-down versions of the beginnings, thus, "Lord, love a duck! Doesn't Spanish look different from everything else now we've done this?" And it's not a bad system at all. Evidently, Bill Gates has personally assured the Spanish Academy that he will never allow the upside-down question mark to disappear from Microsoft Word processing programs, which must be reassuring for millions of Spanish-speaking people, though just a piddling afterthought as far as he's concerned. Meanwhile, in Hebrew, the question mark is exactly the same as our own, despite the fact that it ought logically to be slipped into reverse since the words run from right to left. Remember Professor Higgins in My Fair Lady? The Arabs learn Arabian with the speed of summer lightning. The Hebrews learn it backwards, which is absolutely frightening. So we have an interesting and perverse perceptual problem in Hebrew with the question mark the same way round as our own. It looks back to front. Unsurprisingly, Gertrude Stein was not a fan of the question mark. Are you beginning to suspect, as I am, that there was something wrong at home? Anyway, Stein said that of all punctuation marks, the question mark was the most completely uninteresting. It was evident that if you ask a question, you ask a question, but anybody who can read it knows when a question is a question. I never could bring myself to use a question mark. I always found it positively revolting, and now very few do use it. Since Stein wrote these remarks in 1935, it's interesting that she thought the question mark was on the way out. Even then, those of us brought up with the question mark ethic are actually horrified when a direct question is written without a question mark, as in, for example, the film title Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Unmarked questions left dangling in this way make me feel like an old-fashioned headmaster waiting for a child to remember his manners. And I keep wanting to say, and can you spare any old records? It still says in that charity shop window, now only with a printed sign, not a handwritten one. Every time I pass it, it drives me nuts. Meanwhile, as Kingsley Amis points out in his The King's English, many people start sentences with words such as, may I crave the hospitality of your columns, and then get so involved in a long sentence that they forget it started out as a question, so finish it with a full stop. To do so not only sends the interested reader, if there is one, back to the start to check that the fellow did at any rate start to ask a direct question, it also carries the disagreeable and perhaps truthful suggestion that the writer thinks a request from the likes of him is probably a needless politeness to the likes of the editor. What a marvelous little aside, by the way, if there is one. Of all the conventions of print that make no objective sense, the use of italics is the one that puzzles most. How does it work? Ever since the italic type was invented in the 15th century, it has been customary to mix italic with Roman to lift certain words out of the surrounding context and mark them as special. None of the marks in this chapter so far has anything to do with grammar, really. They are all to be symbolically notating the music of the spoken language, of asking the question and receiving the answer. Italics have developed to serve certain purposes for us that we never stopped to question. When was the last time you panicked in the face of italics? Hang on, this writing's gone all wobbly. Instead, we all know that italics are the print equivalent of underlining, and they are used for 1. Titles of books, newspapers, albums, films, such as, unfortunately, Who Framed Roger Rabbit. 2. Emphasis of certain words. 3. Foreign words and phrases. 4. Examples when writing about language. We even accept the mad white on black convention that when a whole sentence is in italics, you use Roman type to emphasize a key word inside it. Some British newspapers, notably The Guardian, have dropped the use of italics for titles, which, as far as I can see, makes life a lot more difficult for the reader without compensating benefits. Like the exclamation mark, however, italics should be used sparingly for the purposes of emphasis, partly because they are the confession of stylistic failure, and partly because the readers glancing at the page of type might unconsciously clock the italicized bit before starting their proper work of beginning in the top left-hand corner. Martin Amis, reviewing Iris Murdoch's novel The Philosopher's Pupil in The Observer in 1983, complained of a narrator in who was irritating on a variety of scores and explains what can happen to a writer who uses italics too much. Apart from a weakness for quotation marks, N also has a weakness for ellipses, dashes, exclamations, and italics, especially italics. Each page is corrugated by half a dozen underlinings, normally a sure sign of stylistic irresolution. A jangled, surreal, and much shorter version of the book could be obtained by reading the italic type and omitting the Roman. It would go something like this: deep, significant, awful, horrid, sickening, absolutely disgusting, guilt, accuse, secret, conspiracy, go to the cinema, go for a long walk, an entirely different matter, an entirely new way, become a historian, become a philosopher, never sing again, Stella, jealous, happy, and bloody full, God, Christ, mad, crazy. Martin Amis, collected in the War Against Cliché in 2001. What a rotten thing to do, but on the other hand, I feel he has saved us all the bother of reading the book now. But yeah, that'll go ahead and end that particular episode of every reading that there. Let's go back and look at some of the discussions to have, because yeah, I did miss a little bit here. When they were talking on the question mark, there was some interesting parts. The part where they have the secretary take dictation was just wow, because they was telling them which punctuation mark to put in during the actual phrase they were reciting. How anybody can compose a story by word of mouth face to face with a bored looking secretary with a notebook is more than I can imagine. Yet many authors think of nothing, saying, "Ready, Miss Spelman, take dictation." Quote. So you already got quotation marks. No comma. So it's just the quotation marks. And then Sir Jasper Murgatroyd, comma. And yeah, they go on through the whole thing like that. And then they have the reply being, if I had to do that sort of thing, I should be feeling all the time that the girl was saying to herself as she took it down, well, comma, this beats me, period. How, comma, with homes for the feeble-minded touting for custom on every side, comma. Yeah, it just interesting how that worked. But they show how the use of the question mark can be used in sentences, often noting that if you really want to accentuate that it is a question, you end it with an upward inflection. Though she mentions other ways it has been used in the past, such as rhetorical. Instead of the regular question mark like that, it's a question mark like, if it's a rhetorical question, because it's not an actual valid real question. Whereas in Spanish, they've got it now to where it begins with an upside down mark. So if you ask a question in Spanish, ¿Quién es? It would start upside down question mark and end with a regular question mark. But yeah. Talks about Gertrude Stein not liking question marks. And then they've got a short little section talking about the use of italics, which, if you don't know what an italics is, it's essentially when the word is written in the slanted instead of the normal Roman font that you see. It's italicized. So instead of W, it'd be W, because it's got that weird slant and curviness to it. So yeah. But we'll go ahead and end this episode there. Thank you all for watching. I'll, as always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.